Guys, in today's video, Ileana and me are going to be explaining you about Chapter 9, Contemporary American Poetry. You don't know how much we were being suffering to make this, but I hope you to like it. American Poetry. Looking back, some have seen the post-World War II years as a heroic age in which American poetry broke free from containts such as rhyme and meter and flung itself hard first into new dimensions alongside the abstract expressionists in America. Also, during this period, we had two types of poetry. We have poetry of speaking self and poetry of the world, and between both of them, then we find middle range. What does this mean? Some specific poets were focusing about talking about themselves. And by the other hand, there were others that they were talking about how everything surrounding them was or were. But there were also a mixture between both types of poetry in which emerged middle range. Poetry of the speaking self to focus on vivid expression and exploration of deep emotion. Also, inner thought and feelings and psyche. Sets are secondary here. By the other hand, we find poetry of the world. It builds up the meaning of narrative dive details and context in which the sets carefully scenes. We have also the divisions of the poetry of the self and the world. First, we find poetry of self, poetry of place, poetry of family, poetry of the beautiful, poetry of spirit, poetry of history, poetry of wit, and poetry of nature. The last one is cyber poetry. Let me explain you a little bit about what was the poetry of self. Poetry of self is the word direct address or monologue, and its most intense it stares a soul condition. One of the most important writers or poets here was Jerry Graham, 1950. She was one of the most accomplished poets of this area. She was born in New York and grew up in Italy while studying in France at the New York University, specializing in films, which continues to influence her later work. She wrote The Dream of the Unifying Field. By the other hand, we also have the poetry of voice. In the poetry of voice, we find that at further extreme, poetry of self obliterates the self it lack and contembalancy sensibility. The next stage may be a poetry of various voices or fictive self, breaking the monolith idea of self into fragments and characters. One of the most important writers here is Louis Bloch, 1943. He wrote, "You who do not remember passenger from other world, I tell you, I could speak again. Whatever returns from oblivion returns to find a voice." After this, we also have the poetry of self. Poetry of self was focusing on finding deep inspiration in specific landscapes. Poetry of place is not based on landscape description. Rather than land and its history, it is a general force implicated in the way its people, including the poet, live and think. One of the persons that we find here is Charles Wright, 1935. He wrote The Cosmologistry. He was raised in Tennessee. Wright is a cosmopolitan Southerner. He draws on Italian and ancient Chinese poetry and infuses his work in the Southern themes such as Born Out of Tragic Past.